Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Lakewood City Council virtual study session on March 15th, 2021. And we are starting this one a little bit late at about 7:47 p.m. after coming from a special meeting prior. Phone number for tonight's public input is 1-346-248-7799. Webinar ID is 972-9436-2602. When we get to the public input portion, you will press *9 to request to speak and *6 to unmute yourself. So, council, I better take roll. So, Ms. Room, go ahead and take roll.
Paul.
Here.
Abel.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
Gutwein.
Here.
Beta.
Here.
Skilling.
Here.
Springsteen.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Johnson.
I am here.
LeBure.
Here.
And Harrison.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into our presentation tonight, which is the future of Metro Districts. I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Skilling, who's the chair of the Development Dialogue Committee, and his colleagues on that committee are councilors Abel, LeBure, Beta, Skilling, and Councilor Gutwein. And this is a lot tonight, so this might be a part 1 and a part 2. So why don't we plan, on doing a check-in in maybe an hour and a half, and certainly getting that public input in also, and then see if we want to keep going, or maybe we get through it all. Surprise me. So with that, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. So I can just go ahead and answer that question. We are not going to get through all of this tonight. It's not even going to be close. And the reason I say that is by way of background. You all have seen, certainly half the council was a part of the work that was done on this. We had 3 separate sessions in the committee just on this topic. We have dozens of recommendations that are included here. This will certainly take 2 parts. Also, people have been shoveling, working, or both all day, and we started tonight at 5:30. This is going to start causing a little bit of eyes glazing over for everyone, including myself, at some point. So we'll get those diminished returns. I think it's a great idea if we check in an hour and a half, and see where we are, and then also make sure that we have that public comment at a decent hour as well. The presentation, I think we'll probably get through the first 12 slides. And we'll say that the first part of this for tonight is actually some of the bigger items. And one of the reasons I say that we can't get through it all tonight is because I anticipate there will be a lot of discussion on some of these big ones. And we can get right into it. Like I said, we had the 3 different sessions. Jay Hutchinson had put together a pretty lengthy and detailed memoranda last year that all of you received as well. And the committee used that as kind of a roadmap to keep everything organized. So I thank Jay for that, because that was extremely helpful. At our committee meetings, we had a panel discussion that had industry folks, residents, it had all sorts of folks. We had a lot of public comment at all of the majority of the committee meetings had a lot of public comment. And we really tried to do a lot of the heavy lifting so that when we came to council, we could wrap our arms around this, because this is such a big topic with a lot of moving parts to it. And I'm sure people have a lot of opinions. We also tried to really take a leading edge on this and be leaders. As we've been with a lot of our recommendations. We're trying to really make some meaningful changes where we've seen that changes need to happen. And I think a lot of these recommendations reflect that. And finally, before we get started on the slides, I would like to thank all of the committee members, Councilor Abel and Councilor Beda and Councilor Gutwein and LeBure and all of staff, and of course all the public that came out and the other councilors who stopped by as well. This was, as I said, a tough topic. So tough in the sense that it's so big, where do you start? So with that, let's start. We have the first slide. Who is controlling the slides? Is that Mr. Rome?
Yes, it's me.
Yeah, good.
Okay, great. I just wanted to address you so I can say, okay, Bruce, next slide. Okay, so I think we can go next slide, please, Bruce. The first recommendation appears, if you're in the packet for the public and council, we're in the top right corner, it says page 4 of this item. And that starts with the recommendations. We're on recommendation number 1. And this has to do with the disclosures. Now, I won't reread all of this. You've all done that. But just for the public listening in and just to set the stage on this, this is where we've seen, when it comes down to it, a lot of these recommendations are really geared at increasing transparency. And so the people that buy into these communities know exactly what they're getting into, and they can make decisions based on all of the information. And this is, we feel, one critical step in doing that. And we've talked a lot about there being a kind of a honeymoon period. Anyone that's purchased a home, they just can't wait to get the key. So they're not necessarily reading the documents super close. And even before they get to closing, if you are in love with a house, you're already picking out the furniture, you're already doing all that. So we want to make it very clear and not have this buried anywhere, make this very front and center. And by having a 1-page standalone document, in addition to being part of MLS, but having that 1-page document and have it in plain language, no legalese, giving real examples, I think that is critical. And that this would do that, a lot of these recommendations here. Mayor, let me ask you, do you want to just open it up to questions as we go for staff, or how do you want to do this? Because I think we should probably discuss it. I mean, to each of these recommendations, there's basically 2 major parts. There's what the committee recommended, and then there's some additional input by staff after this has been vetted that they've we'll call it recommendations enhanced, which just gives more ideas. And you can see that in slide 1. So I don't know if you want to do questions after each one or how you want to approach this.
So I think it might be, so we don't get lost in it, I think it probably makes sense to go slide by slide. Is there any feedback about that process, Mr. Abel?
Charlie, you're muted.
Sorry, no, I have no, the question's not about the process or comment. It's about the slide and the information on it.
Okay, let's circle back and let's try to figure out process. Do you have a preference slide to slide, or just review it all and come back?
Mr. Skilling said slide to slide. He's the chair and he presented or he's doing the presentation. I would follow his suggestion.
Okay. Then I have Miss Vincent and Miss Harrison.
Yeah, I'm fine with slide to slide. One thing I would like, though, if we could, as we go through these, I know there was quite a few items where they said that probably the legislation was going to look at it, or the legislator was going to look at it for possible input into this. So if we could just highlight those as we go through, that would help me with some of my questions.
Yeah,
Would that work?
Yeah. So one of the problems is we don't know exactly what the state is going to be proposing. We know a little bit of it, and it has to do with some of the minutiae in the election process. There is supposed to be a bigger bill dropping that may address a lot of this, but I don't think we know yet what that verbiage looks like. I think we anticipate that the state is going to do something. How that interfaces with this, I don't know. So, Councilor Vincent, I think the only thing we know for certain right now, as far as bills that are working their way through, I think we know that there's some talk about cleaning up how the election process actually works. But I think that's all we know right now.
That's all you have? Okay, then I'll just keep that in mind as we go through it, and knowing that there may be some other things coming through. So thank you.
Yeah, by part 2, we will know. So when we come back again for part 2 of this study session, we will have seen a bill, if one does manifest.
Come forth. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll have Ms. Harrison and Ms. Franks.
Thank you. I'm very okay with slide by slide. And now may I ask my question about this slide?
No, ma'am. Ms. Franks, process real quick and then we can get back to you.
Yes, process slide by slide is fine. And I do have a couple questions about the slide when you're ready to get to that point.
Okay, so we'll go slide by slide. I'm going to turn it back over. Mr. Skilling, can you drive on this? Do you want to? I don't have controls on the hands anymore, so.
I can't. I'd have to see if I have controls. You guys are all, I just have a 4 screen right now. Let me see if I have the full deal.
I don't know if they made you a co-host.
Mayor, I made you a co-host, and I can, Mr. Skilling, if you'd like. And I also can unshare in between each slide if it would make it easier to see everybody.
Well, if you can just keep Mayor Paul as the driver and let him do that, and then I can just focus on the information. And if you can monitor the hands, that way I can just have the box kind of aside.
10-4. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start. Ms. Harrison, go ahead.
Thank you. My question was the bullet on the left-hand side that says consider enforcement, because the first thing that leaped out for me is who or how or where would the enforcement come from with this document? I'm sure you discussed it, but if it's not there or if it is there and not properly signed or whatever, what does that mean? Thank you.
And I would defer to Jay on that. Or Mr. Hutchinson, sorry, Jay.
Thank you, Jay Hutchison, Director of Public Works. And I appreciate the question about enforcement. That's one of the challenges that we've been struggling with, is how to make all of these things as effective as possible. Who would enforce them? How would they be enforced? How could we make enforcement timely? Those kinds of questions. And in this particular case, that affects several of the suggestions by city staff for your consideration that are on the right. And maybe I'll start at the bottom. If disclosure is ineffective, the party that is most injured, I'm not using that in the full legal sense, but the one that seems to be the most injured would be the buyer. And so the thought in the last bullet on the right is to create an opportunity to make sure that the buyer has an opportunity to pursue the remedy. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is they're probably the most injured if there is an injury. But secondly, they are also the ones most aware. Think about a development where transactions happen over time. There are transactions for decades through multiple sales. The city is probably not going to be real good at tracking every single sale and every pre-sale activity to ensure everything happens properly. There's some things here that will certainly help with that. But the first enforcement comment is that it may be best to have the buyers have that opportunity. Then there are some reporting things. The districts have to do some reporting to the city. At least that's one of the recommendations later that you'll see. And one part of that reporting could be compliance with whatever these decisions are by the city council about disclosure. For instance, if there's a decision to put the disclosure in the county's property records, hoping then that, as they should, they come up on all property searches for that particular lot, and we find that the developer or district rather did not put the appropriate disclosure into those property records before selling a lot, then that should be reported on the annual report, and that's more timely than if it goes on for years and years and years. So some of these are tied together to try to help accomplish that. The other side of the enforcement, which is a difficulty, is in the multiple listing service. As we began investigating that further, it became difficult, and frankly, we didn't find a good way to enforce that. First of all, those are private entities, the multiple listing services. So what authority there is to require something there is interesting. The real estate industry is regulated by the state, but its regulation is limited, and it doesn't include regulation of the MLS. The information that's put in the MLS is put in by the individual realtor or individual selling real estate professional. So there's what seems like a fairly high likelihood that not all of those people who enter information into the MLS would be aware of what might be happening or required in Lakewood. For instance, a real estate agent housed in Colorado Springs might know someone in a Metro District area in Lakewood, but may not know that when they list that property on the MLS that they should include information about the Metro District. And frankly, the MLS doesn't have a lot of space, so probably the most that might happen would be an identifier that yes, the property is within a Metro District. And one of the MLSs that we talked to, and there are multiple MLSs, one that we talked to did indicate that they're considering kind of a checkbox to indicate it's in a Metro District. So that's the other side of the enforcement piece, is that we struggle with how to make the MLS effective. So I'm not sure that's a complete answer, but hopefully that's helpful.
I'm getting a yes. And then, so I have Mr. Abel, Ms. Franks, Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you, Mayor. And that gets right to I guess it's a question. The ideas all seem to be necessary, and I like the staff recommendations that would actually document these things. But our biggest concern was that you go sit down for a closing, you have a large stack of documents in front of you, and you spend maybe 20 or 30 seconds on each one. We wanted to make sure that this disclosure stood out from everything else, that people actually saw, read, or saw and were had an understanding of what the document says and what their obligation might be in the future. And without the MLS, and I can understand where that concern Jay has comes from, because they are entities of their own. But we really need something to show that each of these people, each of these potential buyers are aware of the possible long-lasting tax commitment they will have. So how would you suggest, Mr. Hutchison, that we make sure that everybody, that everyone hears the emphasis on that, the importance of that aspect of purchasing a house in a special district? Any suggestions or from the legal folks or?
I'll offer an idea that we may need to explore more before part two. I think I understand part of the question being the timing, that people don't get this information or aren't required to be given this information until far enough into the process that they're already excited about a purchase. They may have a lot of other documents, those kinds of distractions. Perhaps there is a way that the Metro District could be required to provide the disclosure at an earlier stage. How to define that, we'll probably have to work on. But there's always interaction well before closing with somebody involved in the real estate transaction on the seller's side. Perhaps that disclosure could be brought into that process much earlier. Exactly how that would be required isn't clear to me off the top of my head, but I think that's a large part of your point. And if it is, please confirm it, and we'll explore that some more.
Absolutely. And I think one of the suggestions that popped up when we had the panel of experts on all sides of this issue was that when you go to the sales office, they present you with a document you would sign. It wouldn't have to be notarized, but you would just sign a notice that these residences you will be looking at in this subdivision or Metro District area have this extra tax burden. It could be something that simple and do it right at the sales office. But thank you for that idea, and I think we should pursue it. The more notice they have, the better. Thank you.
Mr. Abel. Ms. Franks, then Ms. Gutwein.
Thanks, Mayor Paul, and thanks to the committee for all the work they've done, certainly, and for Mr. Hutchinson for kind of explaining this. Just wanted to kind of give some framework for kind of how I'll be looking at this, since I wasn't a regular participant at the development dialogue meetings. Obviously, had other commitments. I'll be looking at this to kind of try to classify the various things on level of effort. Level of effort by the city, and what partners would need to be involved, engaged, educated, and are they willing participants and partners or not? So we can kind of understand that level of engagement and effort. The enforceability, certainly, that's going to be a big piece. What teeth do we have if, like you said, some real estate agent from another city may not even know, but they're allowed to sell in Colorado, and suddenly holding them to certain standards. So that enforceability, how would that be done, by whom, and really what are the remedies then? If there's violations, what are those remedies for those violations? Maybe it's a process violation where a one-pager where we've said it has to have a read-me statement across the top and it doesn't. So someone says that maybe they didn't know the importance of it, or maybe we require red text and it doesn't have it, that level of kind of calling attention to it. And then also I wasn't sure, and Jay, this is actually where a question comes in, where you said where it was written, create the opportunity for buyers to pursue remedies. I want to be really clear on what things we would consider things they could pursue a remedy. Was it a process that wasn't followed? Or is it a variance in what the projected additional monetary funds would be? What are they able to pursue as a remedy for? Because those are two different things. One, you didn't follow a process and I didn't get the document. Two could be you followed the whole process, but I was given estimates that didn't turn out to be, they were materially different from what was on the paper. So those are just a whole lot of things on how I'll be looking at all this through those lenses, and just wanted to share that early on.
Thank you. Ms. Gutwein?
On a similar note, I want to understand, what is the opportunity? What do we kind of explicitly have in mind would be the opportunity for buyers to pursue the remedy? Are we talking about court action, or what are we talking about there?
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll take the risk at initially responding, and Ms. McKinney Brown may correct me, which is fine, or may elaborate. We haven't talked about specific remedies that might be available to a buyer. And that partially answers, I think, Councilor Frank's question about where we are as well. Typically, if it were just a contract between two parties, the contract would define the remedy or other factors. In this case, it's more indirect, because the city council would approve a service plan for a metropolitan district. The service plan would create some obligations, and through some vehicle, I'm not sure whether it would be the service plan or perhaps an ordinance or some other vehicle, the buyer would be given the opportunity to pursue a remedy from the selling party or the metro district. That obviously is a little unclear also. So it's a very complex set of transactions and parties that needs some more thought and some more work, frankly. And maybe I'll stop there with just adding complications instead of answers and see if Ms. McKinney Brown wants to add to that.
Thank you. This was a discussion that Jay and I had on 2 occasions in the last 2 weeks, was specifically what type of enforcement could we have. So this has been a real staff focus. And what we know is we're going to have to be incredibly innovative. But what we've done is gone off to, I think, 3 other cities that are having the exact same issues. And we're finding out what they've done. They've done some really innovative enforcement things that haven't put the burden on the consumer, but have empowered the city. For example, not agreeing to give building permits until there is proof that these documents have been filed with the county. Not agreeing to do certain other things unless there's proof that there is annual notice to each homeowner within the area about what's going on with that particular metro district. So we're looking at a broad variety of enforcement actions, and based on what the city council directs at this point, we're going to fine tune that and bring that back with as many opportunities to enforce as we can possibly come up with. But it'd be really great if other cities have tried some of these things already and we've seen what's successful and what's not.
Great, thank you. Mayor, are we taking comments right now or just questions on this stuff?
Well, I'd like to, this is slide 1. I'd like to get us to some sort of consensus of what we feel we can move forward.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but.
Well, I'll just be, I think that this is all really good. I think that the staff recommendations really capture a lot of what we were trying to do. My comment is, for me, having it be part of the MLS listing is really important because, this is how people are searching for homes. They go on Zillow, they see the cost of the home. They're on there. You can also see if they're part of an HOA. It also usually shows the cost in dollars for monthly or annual HOA. In my perfect world, it would have the MLS, you are in a metro district, and it would have the estimated dollar amount of, not mills, not whatever. It would have an estimated dollar amount so that people, as soon as they start thinking about this house, they have a full picture in their head. I think, unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, and it seems like there's not really a way for us to move that forward, but there are some recommendations down the road about how we can do that. I think, I would be interested. I guess my question is, is the HOA required, or is that just encouraged? Because I think that even just encouraging that it's listed, maybe that helps. maybe it's not so much about cracking, like if that it's not there, that there's a consequence, but just starting to get people to list this. So are HOAs required to be listed on the MLS?
Councilor Gu, I'm sorry, but I just don't know.
Okay.
The other thing, Councilor Gutwein, is depending on the direction we get from you this evening, we will bring back an ordinance eventually that's going to define some of these things. So the questions that you're asking, by the questions that you're asking, you're actually defining the kinds of information that will be in the ordinance that you approve. So we'll have an ordinance, plus there will be plans for each metro district as they apply to be a metro district, which will control the way the metro district carries out its duties. So what we're looking at is the broadest possible enforcement and control documents that we can establish.
Thank you. And that's all I have for this one.
Okay. So it sounds like we want to see more about the MLS, and want to see there was a suggestion that Mr. Abel made about something more kind of upfront some way. And I think maybe Ms. McKinney Brown spoke a little bit to that with the require proof of recorded disclosure, but it sounds like there wants to be some more teeth to that part. Anything else or anything you don't want to see based on this slide? Okay. So I think we are good there. Mr. Skilling.
Well, let me just to put a pin in number one here, because it sounded like Ms. McKinney Brown was looking for a consensus about pushing the envelope on the enforcement side for sure, and seeking out other jurisdictions and seeing what they're doing. I think we should add that to wherever we need to add that for tonight about consensus, is that we want to push the envelope. And as to the MLS, trickier when it's a new build, but since a lot of these are going to be resale homes, the MLS could certainly require 2020, what did they pay? Maybe you could also require, if you want to push the envelope, what percentage higher was that than average homes in 8022, fill in the blank. That could be, I mean, if we're going to push the envelope, those are meaty disclosures that really mean something. And then if we can figure out something to Mr. Abel's point, maybe it's a combination of the two. You somehow include that MLS, must be included at the sales office, or something like that, because that would even go a long ways, because that would really be highlighted. But I just wanted to add that because maybe get consensus around those additions so that they have some finer direction on that.
All right. So we can move to number 2 and maybe do a restart here. There was a suggestion that we kind of get general consensus on the broad topic, and then we can drill in a little bit more on these bottom ones to try to move us in if there's questions for staff or more direction. Mr. Skilling, go ahead.
Okay, so the second topic is, and for folks tuning in at home as well, that if you turn to the packet itself is the memorandum dated March 5th, 2021, has much more information than just these slides. So these are kind of the greatest hits of that particular topic, but there's much of finer details, much more finer details in the packet itself that staff put together. So this is to kind of set the stage on this one. Again, coming back to transparency, control, and ultimately at the end of the day, financial implications, which all of these things really end up in the same place, at least from my opinion. Really what you're getting at is finances. I think I made this point before, people aren't, you're not really talking about, these aren't HOA things. You're not talking about are they going to plant an ash tree or an aspen tree or any of that? What we're really interested in is making sure that people understand the significant financial implications that can come with this. And part of that is having the folks that live there and are paying those taxes, that they actually make decisions when it's appropriate for them to do it. And currently, the boards or the makeup of the board of the district is necessarily made up of developers, the folks that are developing it out, or their agents, because there are no residents. So they're making a lot of key decisions up front. And this number 2 is also related to some of these other ones, like number 4 and I think it's number 5, that all relate to issuing debt, refinancing, all of those, some really big decisions that may be made. We're looking for a way to have those decisions made sooner by the folks that are going to actually pay them. And that helps in transparency. It helps for all the reasons that we've talked about, even in the disclosure section. The 2 suggestions are, you could go with a defined time once the district is created. You could say after 2 years, the board has to turn over from a developer control board to a resident control board. Or you could do it, as it said in the memo, the percentage of electors. Once it's 20% built out, there has to be a certain number of folks in those seats, the end users in that seat. You could do it on that sort of a tiered system, so that as more build out occurs, the board begins to reflect that. And that's what this is really about. But this is really an issue that we'll tackle in some of these later topics, because it ultimately comes down to who's making the decisions for the future of the district itself. Developers making the decision about the initial service plan and the application that they make. We'll talk about their debt obligations, their boundaries, all of that stuff. They'll have the pro formas in there for all the finances. But then as the district then takes life and people start buying homes and living there, there are then other obligations, other financial implications that will arise. And so we want to make sure, I think as a committee, we recognize we want to make sure that we have residents making those decisions as soon as possible. And hopefully that will curb some of the issues that maybe we've seen where some reform is needed in the way that it's done now, so that they can actually have resident representation. So that's this number 2.
All right. So is there some consensus on certainly wanting to take up the board transition to end users? And then there's some staff questions that I think might need some guidance on, if I'm reading that right. Ms. Vincent?
Yes, I agree with this, but I think if we're going to do percentage or whatever of transferring over to residents, then I think we're going to have something in there about what if no residents apply? What happens to that?
Yep, that's a legitimate question. And I guess you just start forcing people, and we put that in the disclosure that says, if you choose not to be on, you will be chosen. But no, that is legit for sure, and something we'll probably have to iron out. Ms. Franks?
So on the tonight, when we're, obviously I'm in favor of this. Obviously the transition's been something that Mayor Pro Tem Skilling and I have heard about a metro district in our area. But with regards to once we've said yes on that, how much tonight, I guess it's more of a process question again, how much tonight are we wanting to dig into each of these, or do we want to just give high level, what I'm going to call more inquiries, where we can come back and be educated? Like for me, I'd be saying, defined time what's the pros and cons of that one versus the percentage? And then to speak to Councilor Vincent's point, what happens if? Because I'm just not sure. These things, this is a very huge topic, lots of moving parts. And I wanted to be very respectful tonight, since we are, obviously I've already had a pre-meeting that went long. How much do we want to dig in tonight, or just kind of broad strokes and give staff that opportunity to come back in and then paint in those lines for us?
Yeah, thank you for that. I would just say as broad strokes for me. Mr. Abel?
Yeah, I just wanted to check with Mr. Hutchison. A few years ago, I believe there were the Court of Appeals issued some more strict regulation for notification and conduct of Metro District elections. Isn't that the case, Mr. Hutchison?
There have been some changes over time. I think some legislative, some perhaps through the court as well. And I might take just a moment to mention that the staff recommendations here are simply implementation steps. This is a place where we'll be pushing the envelope. This is pretty creative, because as you know, Metro District boards are a creation of the state law. They're a separate government. They have an election process that's defined in state law. So to change board members, we first have to look at what the state law says to do. And what the state law says is that you have elections at certain times, certain people are eligible to be elected, and there's a certain process. And we'll talk about the process, I think, in a bit. But the recommendations at the upper right on this slide are a method by which we think we can accomplish this. So this is pretty detailed on this particular item. And rather than waiting for an election, which won't happen for a certain number of years after the district's created, the idea here is to require resignations of some of the board members who are developer affiliates at a certain time. And that time would be a defined time, as shown on the left side of the slide, or a defined percentage of development. One of those things would trigger it as you decide. The state law also dictates how vacant seats are refilled on Metro District boards, and it's done by the Metro District Board appointing a replacement. Well, that won't get us to the point that I think the Development Dialogue Committee wants to get, because the developer board, except for the resignee, remains developer controlled for a period of time. So it would be reasonable to assume that they would appoint another developer affiliate to fill that spot. So the second step here is to require an election to replace resignees instead of the board appointing the replacement. And then keeping track of all that is the rest of the staff recommendation. So this is a very specific process. We think it gets to exactly what the committee was asking. The questions are a little bit different, and I won't go into those right now. I'm happy to at whatever point you think it would be helpful.
Thank you. And one follow-up, since you brought it up, and it may require our attorney's opinion, but the state is working on some things and has some things in place that we might want to change. Do we have, as a home rule municipality, the authority to change the some of those things regarding metro districts? Can we make our ordinance more restrictive than the new state law would be, as it looks like it's shaping up?
I'm going to wait to answer that question till we bring information back, and there's a reason. Metro districts are basically a law of the state, and when it's a law of the state, as you know, those are the things we can't home rule out from underneath. But that doesn't mean we can't innovatively look at ways to get to where we need to anyway. So I need you to know we're keeping a really open mind about how to get these goals met.
Thank you. Great response.
All right. Thank you. I have Ms. Harrison, Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you. I just had I'm going to ask this probably on each slide. How do we enforce? I'll just throw that out. And then the other question is, I really like the staff recommendations. The only thing that I would want to make sure of is that that we are going to the owners, the end users, and that we want to make sure that when it's time to replace, that we're going away from the developers people and to the owners of the property. So I don't know how we put that in recommendations, but that would be the one thing that I would want to make sure is clear.
Councilor Harrison, that overlaps, I think, a little bit with Councilor Vincent's point earlier. The state law does define who can be an elector and consequently who can be a board member. And once there are end users and not just developer affiliates who are eligible to be electors, then all of the electors collectively will make that decision. So on the what if there's not an end user who's interested? If there's a vacancy on the board and an election is required to fill that vacancy, then anyone who is an eligible elector can apply to be on that ballot. And later you're going to see a recommendation from the committee to have mail-in ballots. So it'll be much more like a traditional election that most of us are used to. So an end user elector or a developer affiliate elector could put their name in the hat. That way someone will refill the position unless no one applies. And then it'll be up to all the electors to make that choice. So if there are 5 developer affiliates who are still eligible, and there are 50 end user electors who are still eligible, one would think that perhaps an end user elector would be chosen. But it's not a guarantee, but the electors will be making the decision.
Thank you. Just for my suggestion, I kind of like the defined percentage, but I'm with Barb. I think to make a final decision, I'd need to see the pros and cons of both of those. But that's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gutwein?
Thank you. First, I just want to say hats off to staff for coming up with such innovative ways of getting around, getting to these issues. So really, thank you for that. And then I also think that the percentage makes more sense just because development time projects can get delayed, markets can change, all kinds of things can happen. So I think that the percentage is probably the right way to go. And I had one more point here that now I can't remember. Oh, I just wanted to second how I think that Sharon, Councilor Vincent is right, that we really do need to have some kind of what if we don't have resident volunteers that want to do this. Certainly in some cases we will, but it may not always be the case. So I just want to voice, I think that is important that we address that.
Thank you. All good stuff. Jay, thanks for the clarification as to the committee versus staff. That helped me a lot. I would just say simply for myself going forward, I think date or development percentage, like percentage probably makes more sense. And maybe that's an option that depending when they file that plan that you do pick, maybe you have both of them and you pick it at the time of district creation. And if that doesn't work for some reason, they need to come back. There's a safety valve that allows them to come back. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody's comments. On the issue, as far as no one wants to perhaps be on the board, I'm just curious if, just to play the devil's advocate, is that something that we should define or something that the board should look at themselves after they get enough members on there that are the end users? I'm not sure that we want to micromanage the process. I don't know. I'm not sure, but we can certainly look at other cities as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. Any other questions? Mr. Skilling, go ahead.
Well, just to round this out again, I think we should at least give some direction that, it sounds like the percentage, now that might be tied to some other things, but I don't think we need to reach for some arbitrary defined time after the creation. I think we can probably dispatch with that, because what the percentage will do will also be time, obviously. And we just need to, I think, say, okay, we're going to do a percentage, and then we look to the right side of this slide, and there are some questions there, and we've talked about that. We might need some more thought on that. And of course, if they can't fill the vacancy, what does that look like? I suspect on the next topic, when we talk about elections and whether the state makes some changes to that for the notification, right now I think it's probably still like the Denver Post or Hub or something. So if we actually require multiple notifications, email, mail, to tell people there's an election, maybe we'll have a higher probability of getting residents to actually fill those seats. And it could be that maybe as long as you do all of those things and you've gone above and beyond, then if the only folks that are there are the developers, then that's just the way it's going to be. So I'm just saying, let's get rid of the time one, get rid of A, and get consensus on B.
Yeah, that sounds good. Do we have consensus on that? If not, say your piece. Okay, looks like we have consensus on that.
So the next topic, as I just mentioned, this is the actual election, how we're going to, and this comes back to what Jay and what Allison were just saying about, this is where we get the state law issues. This might be a lot more for part two. But in general, what the committee was interested in was, we didn't want some, back in the newspaper notice. We wanted it to be meaningful, make it easy for people to vote. And for the most part, these districts aren't so massive. There's one example of a really big one. But for the most part, they're smaller, medium-sized. So it shouldn't be that big a deal to require them to have everyone's email and to send it to everybody's house, and maybe do it on multiple occasions, and maybe include it in closing documents about what a ballot looks like, or that once X amount of percentage has been completed, you're going to have the opportunity to be part of this board. All of those things we should be able to do. And that was the point of the committee's recommendations on here, was just to make sure that we made it as easy as possible for folks in the community to know about elections and then to participate. And so maybe if the state is going to have some plans for that as well, maybe this is more of a part two discussion once we see what they unveil.
Ms. Harrison?
The only thing I was going to add to that, I like what you've got here very much, is a lot of homeowners associations, and now I realize I'm talking different than districts, but there's usually a place where they post information. It might be by the mailboxes, it might be as you come into the area or whatever, but there's actually a poster required that might be something else to add to this list, especially, around a mailbox. Just a suggestion, but I like what's here. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay. I would just say that if there was a requirement to add a posting, it needs to be pretty specific, because I think there is a posting requirement which sometimes wound up with a post in the middle of a field. So that'd be my only caution. Anything else on this topic, or any clarity that needs to happen? Okay. Mr. Skilling?
So number 4 is certainly one that will warrant a lot of discussion, probably not just in part 2, but certainly when we're at second reading on this. This is really important, that when the stated goal of a district is to pay for the infrastructure, and so that I guess it goes that way they're paying their own way. We don't want this to become a mechanism in which folks are making a profit just for having a district. It's supposed to be a tool that's used, and it shouldn't be adding more of a burden on residents that live there by making money off of the dirt, as they call it. We don't want any complex. We want to make it as simple as possible, as transparent as possible, and eliminate some of these transactions that may not be as above board as you want. You see in the notes here, having maximum interest rates. You could even go, depends on how much, we mentioned micromanaging earlier, it depends on how much oversight the city wants to have as well. Obviously, they're going to have their service plan up front. This would be a big part of that, to make sure that they stick to a certain rate of interest. Maybe they can't have transactions that are too close. Who knows? But this hasn't been as flushed out because this is going to be a bit trickier as to what actual recommendations are going to look like for the service plan application. But I think it's critical when we talk about costs and we talk about some of the bad actors or the bad circumstances that have resulted. A lot of that is from, if anyone read the Post article that Charlie can remind me of the writer's name, but he did a huge series on it and really exposed a lot of different ways that creative financial minds can come up with to make a buck, and it has nothing to do with sewer lines. And so we just want to simplify it and make sure that you're not having this financial beast out there that's, while the stated goal is to put in the lines and the infrastructure, we don't want them operating as some other enterprise to make money, if that makes sense.
It was David Magoya.
There you go.
So for me, this is something I certainly would like to dig in more and probably have more background at the round 2. But one that does jump out, because the economy changes, things go up and down. The competitive market transaction, something that can be based off some competitiveness or some baseline other than prime, might make sense. I just need to know more about it. Let's see here. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts here? Or just come back with some more context to it? And maybe this is an opportunity to see what, if anything, others are doing as well. If there's some other communities that are moving into this realm. Okay.
And there are four options there. We could just expand a little bit more on those. A lot of it does talk about conflict of interest. A lot of it does just talk about complicated financial transactions, for lack of a better word. And maybe it's you cap certain things, but just make sure it's in the service agreement about what that cap, what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
At number 5, if we're moving to number 5, it's related to 4, it's related to 2, it's related to a lot of them, because this is at the end of the day what having end users control a board, what having transparency at the very get from the sales office and MLS. I mean, this is where you really get to, because you want to make sure people know what they're getting into, and that you can't just have reissuances of debt or certain things with Tabor, all of those things. We heard a lot of consternation about having the Tabor elections before you actually have the residents there. And so you're just kind of going through this motion. It's called an election, but is it really an election? It's just kind of I don't know the best term for it, but it's not a true election. Let's put it that way. And there's certain ways that you could do that, and indicated here as well, making sure that the ballot language is actually in the service plan itself, and especially limiting what financial and debt obligations the board can obligate prior to the end users controlling. So even though in your service plan, you may say, okay, we've got an obligation, we have a debt, our debt ceiling is going to be $1 million. If they want to increase that, the only way they can increase that is if they're going to have a end user control board, and they're obviously going to have to vote on it. But we're not going to have the same folks that did the service plan, the developer controlled folks, issuing new and further debt or doing certain financial transactions prior to the end user board coming on. Because at the end of the day, all of these other topics we've spent now a lot of time discussing, whether it's elections or what have you, doesn't amount to a hill of beans if you've already obligated the end users through the developers. So we want to make sure that while they can obligate when they come to us in the service plan, they can say, hey, we want $1 million. That's transparent. That's fine. But if they want to do more than that in the future, that's going to have to come once they have a resident controlled board. And that's what number 5 is all about.
All right. Thank you. Council, any discussion or comments or clarity needed? I'm not seeing any. Ms. Gutwein?
Sorry, I couldn't find my digital hand for a second there. Couple questions. I think I do really like having, I think it's a really good suggestion to include the Tabor question, the initial Tabor question in the service plan, so that council can look at that as we're making the decision. On B, I think that is kind of, the heart of what our concern is. And so I do think this is a good direction, but I want to understand a little bit more of the context of, how common is it for, especially smaller districts, which is what we're most likely to be seeing in Lakewood, how common is it that they would be coming back for more debt? Just so that I just really want to make sure I understand the impacts of this. But I think, so if there's any information about how often, is this, most of them do this or it's very rare, that would just be helpful for me to understand as I make that decision, or kind of what would be the reasons that they would come back for additional debt. But generally, I think that is a really, I think that's the heart of what we're trying to do here. So I think that's good. Maximum debt amount, I think we absolutely have to include that. So that's all.
Mr. Abel.
It has happened, Ms. Gutwein, once since you and I have been on council. The promenade out at Mills came to us for a boost in debt of a few $1 million, but it was interrupted by the ruling I referred to earlier, when the appellate court upheld new rules for Metro District elections, including Tabor. I hope that helps.
Right, I got a thumbs up. Anybody else? Okay. Mr. Skilling?
So 6 is, and council's had a bit of experience with this, and by experience I mean frustration. about how it is that we actually oversee these districts and what types of things we can actually do. And this one's got a lot of detailed proposals that I know staff has come up with, everything from the, on the budget and audit, from the, we've got the pro formas on the financials. I think these are all great, but the devil will be in the details on some of this, because one of the suggestions is that when they're presenting a service plan to council, you want council to be educated about if this all adds up and if this is financially responsible, financially sound. And the only way to really do that is to have a firm, a consulting firm, an accounting firm, what have you, to actually come in and do it, which I think we would all agree on. But now here's the tough part. It's not going to be the city that does it. We're not employing them. But how do you trust what they're coming at you with? I mean, I think we've all heard, we've heard in some other discussions, some agenda items that have been in front of us, that you might see the same firm over and over again. And I think over time, you're going to say, well, of course you're going to say it's financially sound. They just paid you $100K to say it. And so I think we all agree, of course, you want some financial expertise in there, because city council, we want that data so that we can make the policy decision. We shouldn't be here crunching the numbers. Not like that. We need to look at the numbers, but we're not forensic accountants. That's not our business. So I think while we would all agree that a firm should do it and that the developer should pay for it, what does that look like? Can they just hire anyone out there? And that's where I think we're going to need some discussion by this body, is to figure out how to do that part, because we need council to trust the data. And if they don't trust the data, then there's absolutely no point in going through that. And you don't want people spending that kind of money only to have, the credibility be an issue. So we need to figure that out. And we need to be realists to know that if these folks are going out to hire a firm, the first conversation is going to be, hey, I need to get this service application passed before a council. And they're a very inquisitive council, and they're a very smart council. And so you need to say that this is all okay or figure out a way. I know that's really cynical, but now's the time to be cynical about it so that we can find a solution. So that's my 2 cents on that. That's, I think, the challenge facing us, the biggest challenge on this one.
And Mr. Hutchison has his hand up, which means he might have the magic solution here.
Yeah, I'm a little short on magic, but perhaps this will help. The proponents for Freddie Metro District will hire a financial firm who will lay out their financial plan, what kind of debt they'll need, and using all of their assumptions, how fast the development will occur, all of those kinds of things. And they've done that historically as well. My understanding of the committee's request was that we find a way to independently check that, essentially. And so the suggestion here would be that the city would choose a second consultant, not to replace what the district proponents need, but a separate consultant working for the city, hired by the city, chosen by the city with the involvement of her finance department. And then that entity working for the city, clearly the cities would be the client, would do the kind of analysis that would provide the city council that information that Councilor Skilling described. However, there's no reason for the city to have that range of expertise day in and day out. These things don't come along often, and it's not the kind of analysis we do for other purposes. So the thought is, by having a consultant, we'll be getting the expertise when we need it and not keeping it when we don't, but it needs to be paid for. And so the further recommendation, I think actually that came from the committee, was that the proponents be obligated to pay the city's costs for having that consultant, even though the proponents wouldn't have any involvement in selecting or managing the consultant.
Thanks for that, Jay. I think that makes a ton of sense. Certainly somebody that answers to us, but is paid for by somebody else. Ms. Johnson, your hand's up.
Thank you. Another way to approach that might be if the city knew of perhaps 2 to 4 different businesses and vet them and suggest that they use those businesses that we would recommend and that we know would be reliable and honest. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Thank you. So council, anything more on this? We have that recommendation that basically Jay just outlined.
Well, and I know I believe somebody had mentioned to me that at some point there might be other cities, Aurora, Fort Collins, Loveland, somewhere up north, that are looking at some of this, these actual financial, whether it's disclosures or this consulting. So just to staff, there may be some other folks in those municipalities that are doing stuff. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, or at least look at what they're doing, and then we'll just turn it to level 10. So.
Yep. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, it's 9 o'clock or close to, where was the point at which you wanted to have public comment? I don't know where you guys were thinking, but just a question. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's a check-in with the group to see how far we want to continue. You know, the goal of public input is for them to be able to weigh in on kind of everything that we've talked about, so they have that opportunity to have a full picture. So I just go to council.
7, 8, and 9 are 7, I think, is a no-brainer. 8, not a huge topic. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And then I want to get to 9 tonight because I want 9 and some variants of 9 to be a discussion that comes to part 2. And I think we'd be done at 9 topic 9. And then 10 was when I mentioned earlier, that's slide 12. I think 10 appears on slide 12. And topic 10, that's when you start getting into some more discrete issues. For example, topic 10 talks about recommendations C1 through C10, and it gets a lot more dense from there. So I think we can certainly be through these last topics fairly quickly and get to public comment.
Awesome. If there's no objections, we'll just keep rolling that way then. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Okay.
All right, so 7 is requiring that City Council approve any requests before a district were to utilize eminent domain within their boundaries. So, like I said, I think that's a no-brainer. I think that eminent domain, anytime anyone even utters those words, there's going to be a lot of consternation. So I think this is part of our desire to, at least to some extent, have a bit more oversight on what these districts are doing. And it will certainly increase notice, transparency. I think that it's, like I said before, I think 7 is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I just have a quick question to clarify. So Title 32, if I'm serving me correct, would this encompass water and sanitation districts as well? I mean, some of our utility districts do need condemnation powers when looking to do, like even our established ones, when looking to do new piping, new things like that, potential sewer lift stations, a lot of those different things. So would they be exempt? Is this just to new developer districts, or would this apply to our existing water and sand districts?
May I, Mayor?
Please.
Thank you for that question. It's an important one, more broadly even, because under state law, there's this very broad group of special districts that include all of the kinds of things that you just described. From staff's perspective, our understanding is that all of this discussion by the City Council and the Development Dialogue Committee would only apply to that slice of special districts being metropolitan districts only. So not water districts, not sewer districts. Now, to put a footnote on that, metropolitan districts have, in the broadest sense, the opportunity to be water and sewer districts. or to provide water and sewer services rather. But this particular discussion, as far as the staff's understanding is that it deals only with metropolitan districts, would not affect the other types of districts in the city.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I think I'll probably learn more as we move forward. We do have some established metro districts that could encumber some things as well. So I'll just want to think through that as we move forward, but I'm good. Thanks. Mr. Skilling, looks like that's all that we have.
Okay. So number 8, there isn't a lot of discussion on 8, but so there are examples of districts where you have multiple districts, one of which is extremely small, not even the size of a lot, and its sole purpose in life might be various things. It might be the finance district. It might transact with the other 2 districts. That's the kind of, going back a few topics, it's that kind of financial structuring that is fraught with transparency issues, and it gets extremely complicated. And again, trying to simplify how these districts work and not doing any financial transactions or any established hierarchy of districts or interactions between these districts that become extremely confusing for the homeowners to understand. And that will also, that's where you might get some of the abuses, is from having these multiple districts. And again, so think about it, some of those districts, if it's a small one, not even big enough for a lot, that means you're not going to have an end user. If you don't have an end user, it means it's always going to be controlled by the developer. Then the question is, well, why does it need to always be controlled by the developer? And there we are. You just eliminate that by eliminating multiple districts. I think that for part 2, what folks may want to understand on the council and staff and the public is, what would a reason be that you would need a multiple district setup? Why do you need multiple districts? And if there's a really good reason to have it, then explain, well, we need to figure out then how we can make sure that we have enough guardrails around it, that it doesn't become, like I said, this instrument to prevent transparency or for financial abuse or what have you. So I think that's where we are with number 8. So yeah, that's 8.
Nice summary. Council, anything on this? I think this is certainly a concern we've heard over in kind of the Ward 4 neck of the woods.
And then, so 9 would be similar to a lot of this stuff. I mean, if so 9 was, and the committee did discuss, well, should we just have a committee recommendation on whether or not to just prohibit these things altogether? And then the decision was made, well, let's leave that to the full body and let's make sure that we're bringing work product back to all of you. And if council ultimately decides that it wants to prohibit metro districts, then so be it. One of the ways you figure out if you want to prohibit metro districts is by having this very conversation. You go through all of these, and if at the end of it you say, this is super complicated, it's going to be a whole lot of oversight and micromanaging. Is there really a reason to even have these things? Is there a compelling reason to even do this? And my only 2 cents on that, I think what we, as part of 9, what we should also consider for part 2 is, if not an outright prohibition, are there options to say, do we limit the size of them? There's small districts all over the place that nobody ever hears about. And it could be that it's a great tool for doing a lot of the things that people have said they want, whether it's affordable housing or what have you. And it's, the bigger these things get, and when you start talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and, big geographical areas, that's what could just be rife with the problems. And that's the exception. And really the rule is most of these are going to be small. Most of them are going to work out great. So do we limit things? We say, well, you can have special districts in Lakewood, but you can only have a debt obligation of X, whatever that number is. You can only do it for 50% of your infrastructure. You can only do it for, if it's 200 homes or less. I don't know. I mean, that's up to you guys to decide. But I think there are options. There is a prohibition, and then there's these other ones too you could think about. Maybe just limit the size. Maybe that solves a lot of the issues anyway, because you've limited the size of these, what could become monsters. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Ms. Franks.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. I know that this number 9's been discussed before, but I wanted to kind of make sure that the community's kind of aware of where my position is so far. While I don't know where council will ultimately land, a prohibition is a council decision and therefore could be changed, in the future. So I think this is such a worthwhile discussion that I wouldn't want to jump to 9. I would want to really have good quality conversations about all of the points, so there was a good record, no matter what way we go, about the things that we all felt were important and help to safeguard our community. So while I can't predict where we'll end up, I certainly think that the deep discussions help us understand our community's concerns, help us share with each other where we think that there may be some concerns, and then that lays a great foundation no matter where we land. So I don't want to see this get pulled too far to the forefront before we have good, meaningful conversations about the detail. That's at least just my input. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you. Ditto on what Barb talked about, as well as one question that I would really want to have in that conversation. Knowing that metro districts, a lot of times what they're doing is having the district itself pay for the infrastructure that's needed in a development. Someone's got to pay for that, whether they pay for it in the house itself or they pay for it in the fees directly in the district every year. One of the questions that I would have is if we do away with metro districts the way the tool has been used, does that and how much does that affect the increased cost in housing? Because one of the things that we're fighting with is affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing. If we eliminate metro districts and don't have that additional way of funding for the infrastructure, I know they'll eventually pay for it, but does that really put the kibosh on our housing market in the city of Lakewood? So that would be a question I think I would like to have part of the discussion when we come back to this. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Vincent, and I think I saw Mr. LeBeer. I don't know if your question was addressed. Ms. Vincent, go ahead.
You're muted, Sharon. Sharon, you're muted. Start over.
All right, I'll start from the top. Yeah, I'd like to have some more discussion around this. And I also want something to take back to the community on this. What this can impact not only affordable housing, but also what we like to refer to as attainable housing. And of course, I come from what I know, how metro districts have worked well with the situations that I'm involved with. So I really do want to have some discussion around this and see if, to your point, maybe Councillor Skilling, we do look at how large these are and some definitions around that. So yeah, and also for what the Councillor Franks and the other councillors have said concerning this. So Councillor Harrison, I think specifically. Thank you.
All right. Mr. LeBeer, did you have anything, or were you?
Yeah. I'll just add, I agree with what Councilwoman Frank said. I think it'd be good to have a much deeper discussion on this later, but I just thought I'd point out, though, we do sort of have a de facto prohibition on metro districts in the sense that they have to come here to get approved, and that's probably pretty unlikely. And then also we kind of solved for the small versus big issue, because I think the metro districts that we would be willing to approve would probably be smaller, just generally. But just thought I'd point that out. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with everything folks have talked about. A lot of different ways. You know, I'm not so. You know, the larger districts don't really bring affordable housing. Let's face it. The experiences that we've had, our larger districts aren't really affordable neighborhoods, and so maybe that's a caveat to having a larger district is some sort of affordability that's tied into it. And I don't know if that conflicts with some of the legislation that's happening at the Capitol this year in regards to maybe inclusionary zoning or things like that. But that'd be something that I think could help us in those larger ones where we don't see it also. So I'm not seeing any more hands, and I'm not seeing a conversation to say, no, let's just stop. So it looks like we'll continue carrying this forward as well, number 9. All right, Mr. Skilling?
And Mayor, I think that's the natural stopping point for tonight. And that discussion we just had, I think, is an important one that I think we need to certainly talk more about. And so, yeah, that's where I would suggest the stopping point, because we're after 9 o'clock. We likely have public comment, and so we could get to that. And then part 2, I suppose we could go through. We could figure out. We could either do kind of a rehash of tonight, kind of come back with some of the information that staff has been questioned about, and then move on to topics 10 and so forth, or however you guys want to do that. But there are some recommendations still to get through. And the next meeting on this would likely be, it'd probably be a long meeting. I mean, it'd be longer than this, because we're going to have to go through a lot of these ones again, and then also tackle these other recommendations I think are really important as well. So.
Okay. Well, I think that sounds good. And I think we made a lot of headway tonight, and the recommendations that I think have come out of development dialogue have really got us to this point, as well as the staff side. So it may not be as big of a lift going forward. Ms. Hodson?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the agenda calendar, and it looks like if you're willing and interested, we can do part 2 on April 19th. That's about a month from now. Today is March 15th. I don't think we can do it sooner. The study session before is April 5th, and we're going to talk about short-term rentals, and I anticipate that to be a pretty lengthy meeting. So after that is on the 19th, we have 3 presentations from LAC, and maybe we can do the part 2 on Metro Districts on the 19th. What do you think? Does council like that, or do you want to extend it further? And then Jay, is that something we can have prepared by the 19th? Jay Hutchison?
I think there he is. He's still here.
Yeah, I think we could have more information by the 19th. I was just thinking about the packet schedule, which would require completion of that information by April 2nd, which is still a couple of weeks away. I'm not sure whether we'll get to everything that we've talked about this evening and the additional questions that came up tonight, but we'll get what we can.
You want to go with that? Should we plan that? The 19th of April?
I got 2 hands up here. I have Mr. Skilling shaking his head no, and Ms. Franks with her hand up.
Well, I just thought about it. I thought about not only the packet, but then we talked about the legislature. And so by April 2nd, that's not going to get us where we need to be. I mean, we need to make sure the legislature has done what they're doing. I mean, Jay and Allison both brought that up. So I, as much as I'd like to get through this, I think we do need to kick it out further, make sure that we're taking into account packet time and any other thing we need to figure out with the state legislature and how that impacts us.
Okay. Well, I wasn't expecting that.
Well, but just keep in mind, they could kick out till I think July now with their delayed start. Just food for thought. I mean, we might have some more defined legislation if we went a little bit further into April that we could try to apply, but they're going to be, they could be out for a while. So Ms. Franks and then Ms. Harrison.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to Councilor LeBeur's point. We don't, we're the safeguards, so obviously any application, so we're not up against a hard and fast deadline. I really want to make sure staff has a chance to see what other municipalities are doing. We're going to be doing some innovative things here. Again, we don't have any applications, so I'd rather see, push it out a little bit farther and give staff that time. Also give those of us who were not on development dialogue and who are not as familiar with volumes of information, and I'm a detail-oriented person, so I also need the time to really go and put the necessary time in. We've been focused on short-term rentals in another committee or commission, and I just feel like now I'm drinking from a fire hose and I want to go and sort of digest that, so I'd be looking at something farther out than you mentioned.
We have an open study session on June 21st.
That's not CML?
CML's in Westminster this year. I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember CML.
Yeah, they might have kicked it to September, actually.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we would do then is if the 21st works, since we don't have any other agenda item, we would try to secure that and make that the only item, understanding this is going to be a long, we actually do try to do that, knowing it's going to be a long conversation with a lot of community interest. We try to single source if we can, single topic,
What if we did this? What if we paralleled tonight's conversation to the June, but then April 19th, we take up the rest of these slides, or do you have to have everything together to do that? We could take up part 2 of tonight's conversation on the 19th and then could try to have that whole staff turnaround by the 21st of June.
If that's what the group wants to do, then essentially the information's already prepared. If we're just going to finish the deck on the 19th, then the whole thing is presented. It's all out in the community, so that gives you lots of time for individual conversations, for ward meetings, etc. And then we come back on the 21st and dedicate a whole study session for the follow-up piece. Do you like that? I see a couple thumbs up.
Yep.
Okay, so we do part 2. There won't be staff preparation because it's just finishing the deck. We do that on April 19th, and then go back to June 21st, and that's a single topic on that date. And we'll book that. Bruce and I will book that right now.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
CML is September, just so you know, FYI.
All right. Thank you. Take that long drive up to Westminster. All right. So now we got public input. And this is the opportunity for the community to weigh in. And again, I'll acknowledge that there was a comment on Lakewood Speaks, I think from Mr. Greaser, as well as there's been quite a bit of comments throughout the development dialogue from different folks. So we'll give everybody their 3 minutes. I'll let you know when your 30 seconds is up. And as soon as you start, we'll start that. Give us your name and address, and we'll get this going.
First caller is 9949.
Good evening, caller 9949.
Hi, good evening. Brian Ottaviano, address 1989 South Lake Road. Wanted to say excellent presentation on a fairly mundane topic that has severe impacts across multiple fronts, but it was a really good presentation, so thank you for that. I am a owner of a mortgage company that has done quite a bit of work with regard to new developments, and we deal with the end user being the buyer. I like the concept of notification to buyers, letting them know that there is additional expense associated with a metro district. One of the things that I've found that's been very helpful is kind of a comparison between an increased tax bill versus an increased sale price. And while we were watching the content, I ran a few numbers as it relates to just some of the differences that exist between a $500,000 sale price and a $600,000 sale price, with a tax percentage of 1 1/8, which would include the metro, versus a 0.625 without a metro. And it was interesting, the higher sale price carried about a $200 a month increase over the metro district payment. And I know there's some conflict there with, you know, a tax bill having a much longer implication than an actual sale price. But I think in this environment, especially in Colorado and in the metro area, ability to qualify becomes a very real and very relevant element for buyers. As discussed earlier, there's not a affordable housing that's going to exist as far as a metro district is concerned. But when the sale prices are pushing $500,000 and $600,000, by having that extra $240, $250 a month benefit, it allows for folks to be able to qualify for a little bit more home. So just wanted to touch on that. I felt that it was relevant as far as my experience with regard to home buyers and how they perceive the metro district versus the increased sale price. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right.
Next, we have 1822.
1822, good evening. If you unmute, give us your name and address, and we'll get you started. *6 to unmute. Caller 1822, is that 1822? You are on *6. Okay, we can circle back, Mr. Room. Let's go to the next one and we can come back and see.
6435. 6435.
Good evening, 6435. Give us your name and address. We'll get your 3 minutes going.
Hello, this is Robert Onema, 9749 West Cornell Place.
Good evening.
Good evening. So yeah, I'm a real estate agent, and I'm touching on the MLS input that you discussed earlier on, and it is an issue. Like for the MLS field for HOA information, it would include like a monthly cost for the HOA or annual plus what it covers. Something similar, I think, could be important to do with the metro districts, so that the buyers and the buyer agents would be alerted that there is one, and how much it costs and what it might cover, and perhaps some contact information as far as a phone number who one could call to get more information about the metro district. To do this, I think it's complicated currently for real estate agents to figure out which metro districts might be included with a particular property the agent is looking to put for sale. So I think a centralized database would be good. So I don't know if the city and the county and the state would be able to work together on a database that would incorporate many of the metro districts. Additionally, I took a class on metro districts and was impressed with this one particular attorney that specializes in metro districts, and I think that that information could be helpful for you guys to reach out to and be able to get quick insight from somebody that has a legal background to deal with this kind of stuff.
Great. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to email council that info, that'd be fantastic.
Very good.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Rome.
5552.
Good evening, caller 5552. You are up. Give us your name and address and we'll get you going.
Hi, everybody. My name is JD LeBeau. I'm in the Solterra community. And I just wanted to share with you guys my experiences and why I think that while your task is very, very difficult, I think a lot of the things that are occurring are more about the horses already out of the barn. I've been living in Solterra for about 5 years now, and I'm going to be leaving Solterra because what ends up happening is something becomes affordable to purchase a home. However, the tax implications that you start to see grow, and the mills and the debt that becomes exposed and basically given to developers as they share their indebtedness with each other, causes people to foreclose homes. And I can envision that happening not to wealthy people, as in Solterra, but to probably homeowners who are starting out who don't really understand this clause. So while I really do applaud your efforts on the disclosures, I really do believe that we need to look at what the purpose of Metro special districts are for the developer. And they're merely, as you all know, just another way in which to finance for costs. What we found here in Solterra is that while Brookfield has been trying to be a little bit clear on what they've been spending, you guys have all mentioned the situations where we really don't have any checks and balances. This body nor any legislative committee has the capacity in which to get those checks and balances and really have a valid way to keep developers in check to say, yes, you actually did spend $6 million on the pipe, and we've asked for that here and we just don't get it. So potentially what I would like to see, and if you guys would like to discuss it, it would be great to see, is that when a developer comes and wants to sign for RGA or for a special district, you actually looked at their financial obligation to be able to need one, right? Because what we've found is huge developers like Brookfield, as an example, don't really need the financial costs. They're actually finding a way to make more money, and so they're looking for loopholes within this Title 32 to increase their costs. A couple other things I wanted to mention. Councilor Gutwein, you mentioned about HOA disclosures. I believe, and I'm not a realtor, but my realtor, who I'm working with very closely now, the only mandatory disclosures on MLS is for lead paint. Anything else is not mandatory. But again, very worthy to go down and try to get those disclosures on MLS. I think that's really it. I think my 3 minutes are probably close. So thank you very much for taking this on. And it's a very difficult topic, and I applaud your efforts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. All right. Mr. Rome, next, please.
9233.
Caller 9233, good evening. If you give us your name and address, we'll get your 3 minutes going.
My name is Tim Wade. I'm a citizen and business owner. Business is 13401 West Alameda Parkway in Lakewood. I appreciate everybody's hard work and time on this important subject. I know you've been in meetings for hours and hours today. I really appreciate that. I just want to say a few words and relate what we're doing here tonight, what you're doing tonight, to sustainability. Not the sustainability on the homepage at lakewood.org relating to the environment and energy, but rather the sustainability of the quality of life for the citizens of Lakewood in regard to housing. Sustainability, by definition, is meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. With that in mind, the city of Lakewood has approximately 71,000 homes. As of tonight, as we're speaking, there's only approximately 42 homes available for citizens to purchase, plus all those people outside Lakewood who are wanting to purchase and make Lakewood their future home. Lakewood is the 5th largest city in Colorado and has just 42 homes available tonight. Compare that, for example, to Littleton, which is about 1/3 the size and offers nearly twice as many homes for purchase right now. As you can see, we have a serious challenge in Lakewood, and any discussion about metro districts in 2021 must be in the context of this challenge. Many of you, as a citizen of Lakewood, as me, we promised our kids that if they follow the right path when they're younger, they too can reap the rewards and stay in Lakewood and perhaps settle down and have a family and a home of their own someday. So I believe it's imperative that if we're going to continue to deliver on that promise, which is our challenge here in 2021 and frankly for the upcoming years, that we keep all applicable tools, including metro districts, readily available. And for this reason, I really think your work is very, very important and appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, looks like we'll go back to Mr. Rome, the caller who we can't get through to.
1822, they called in twice, so I unmuted both of them. Maybe that'll work.
Caller 1822, if you press *6 to unmute, give us your name and address, and we'll start your time.
Good evening, John Henderson. How are you all?
Good evening from the North Country of Maine. How are you doing?
Doing great. Wish we had your snow. At any rate, this is a fantastic effort. I celebrate, not only congratulate, but celebrate the staff, the council, and everyone involved in this effort. You all have done some incredible work, and I can say that with some authority, having appeared in front of the city council for Denver, Aurora, Broomfield, Longmont, Loveland, and more to come. There is a lot going on. A lot of other cities are engaged. I encourage you to do as you all already suggested, and that is to compare notes. There's good work being done up and down the Front Range. As I have before, I'll share more detailed comments, but I wanted to highlight just a couple of things. First of all, the deep dive into the compelling reason for having metro districts is really important. We have some empirical data from Solterra, where we added up the price of the developed lots, which included the cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the land, and the profit. And based upon the numbers, Brookfield made $75 million profit after paying for infrastructure and the cost of the land when they sold the developed lots. So there really is a need for the development community to demonstrate that they cannot develop homes without doing it the traditional way, that they need metro districts. I'm probably close in the time, Mayor, so give me a heads up. But the other thing I wanted to suggest is that the market forces really can do a lot of the work for you. I have received dozens of calls from real estate agents over the last 2 years. They really want this information. If you create a website or a page on your website that says, here are all the metro districts.
30 seconds.
Here are all the metro districts, and here is the information, the disclosure for each of those metro districts. I guarantee you the good real estate agents are going to go to that source and provide that information to their clients. I'll give the details on the other responses later, but thank you all very much for all the good work you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll send you the snow your way. I do not see any more hands up. Mr. Rome, do you concur? Anybody else for public input?
I do concur, Mayor. No one else.
All right. Thank you all so much. Hey, thank you for all the callers this evening. Some great feedback and some interesting facts, especially 41 listings. That's quite interesting. So I would encourage you to continue to be in this process. The mortgage side was helpful. Continue to work with us and follow us through. And hopefully when we're done, we'll have a good product to go forward with. So that exhausts our evening. This is a study session. So if you have any committee reports that you would like to go ahead and address, please feel free for our committee members. Now my screens are moving around. Okay. Mr. LeBear, I'll start all the way on my right.
Sure, I'll be brief. I just want to mention we had our sub-regional Dr. Cog meeting today, and it looks like Lakewood is on track to get a little bit more money for some projects over, I think, in Ward 4 down on off of, I'm not going to think of the street, Wadsworth. So anyway, Ward 3, sorry. So I just wanted to mention that. That was great news. Glad that that's moving forward. I don't know when that goes through, but just wanted to mention it. And sort of the highlight of my week. Another meeting. But thanks.
Thank you for that. I think it was around 2.8, 2.9 million.
Well, that was the request, but I don't think we're getting that much.
Okay. I'm getting a no, but it's wishful thinking.
Like
Ms.
half
Harrison?
that.
I think you called me, Mayor. Thank you very much. Just a reminder to the Head Start Committee, we have a meeting tomorrow evening at 4:30. So just a reminder, it'll be Zoom, and we'll talk with you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Franks?
Thanks, Mayor Paul. Just wanted to give a report as the newly elected chair of the Volunteer Screening Committee. Thanks for all the support from my fellow counselors, and really wanted to acknowledge once again, we have just, we get such quality applications. We get a lot of them now, and to fill good positions. And so we just really want to extend our thanks to everyone who spent their evening with us interviewing, and certainly the candidates that we've put forth will be coming up on a future agenda, and just encourage folks to keep looking at the open positions. There's some good ones still open, and we really want your participation. So thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. Ms. Gutwein?
Thank you, Mayor. The Legislative Committee met last Monday, March 8th, and we wanted to meet again to discuss some of the bills that are moving kind of quickly through the legislature that are impactful to Lakewood. And the two bills in particular that we had a lot of discussion on are the jail population bill, and then the minors, the beds for minors bill. We are tentatively going to be meeting every other week moving forward. And, you know, as always, it's a very active session, lots of moving parts, and I just really want to thank Mr. Goldstein for, you know, keeping us all informed and engaged as we work through these bills.
Thank you. Mr. Abel?
Thank you, Mayor. For the last couple of years, I've been serving on the local coordinating council for human services transportation serving Jefferson County. It's a long name and even longer list of duties. There, we address the needs for mobility services for older adults, people with disabilities, and those with low incomes or limited mobility. Since the pandemic set in, the opportunities to develop mobile transportation networks has been complicated, to say the least. Some folks have no longer offer transportation services, and those that do are scrambling to keep them operable. However, one of the bright spots is Lakewood Rides. Lakewood Rides is filling in places where they're needed, filling gaps that are left by other providers, and it is through the capable leadership of Dawn Sluter and a real commitment of the staff from Lakewood Rides to make sure folks can get to the doctor, they can get to the pharmacy, they can do the things they need to do and have a dependable way to get there. So great job by staff and the city manager and her staff. So hopefully these problems will work themselves out and funding will appear from Washington, D.C. any day now to help revive some of these mobility services. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilor Bida.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder, we have our budget and audit board meeting on Wednesday, the 24th of March, starting at 5:30. It'll be a virtual meeting. We do have a fairly robust agenda, and we always welcome all the citizens if they want to tune in and hear what's going on with our finances as far as the city's concerned. And of course, we always welcome any city council members to participate as well. That's all.
Great. Thank you very much. I would just mention that Metro Mayor's Caucus, we continue to look forward to having conversations about transportation funding, and that bill is supposed to be dropping sometime. I think we keep hearing that it's going to be pushed, and it's going to be something, but it's not going to certainly be a ton of money, but over time, hopefully it will grow. Anxious to see, when we have the Rescue Act dollars eventually coming in. And I know Ms. Hodson and her team are working through that, and we'll hear more about that. But behind that is also an infrastructure plan. And that infrastructure plan could pump in a lot of dollars as well and maybe get some of our main projects done. There could be, it's going to be not called earmarks, but there could be something along those lines reissued in Washington, D.C. that might allow some extra dollars to flow into the communities of our representatives. Other issue, certainly for the mayors and trying to work with the police chiefs and the mayors, is the jail population bill. It is of concern for so many, and so we'll continue to work on that. Ms. Vincent.
Yes, one of our constituents.
Oh, can you unmute? I'm sorry.
I was. Yeah, we had a constituent reach out to us, and although this is not a committee, they wanted to give a shout out to the Lakewood PD and to West Metro for all the help that they did in the snowstorm. They actually witnessed folks, West Metro, helping people out and taking care of them. So although it's not a committee report, I wanted to make sure that their voice was heard in this. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Springsteen?
Well, so I was going to report on my stakeholders group with Representative Leslie Herod, and we have pushed along legislation over the past week, which I believe she's going to be presenting to the General Assembly sometime this week or next regarding forcible injection, which, as we know, is an important issue to address in Lakewood.
I think she locked up there.
I wasn't going to touch anything, and so Ms. Springsteen, are you still there? Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate the updates. I'd just clarify that that's not a council committee. That's something that's being done outside of the council roles, and wanted to just make sure when we're out representing the community, we do that either officially in these roles on these committees, or make sure we let folks know that we're doing it independently. And I know I can see, Mr. Abel, was that a concern to you?
No, what makes you think?
It just looked like you wanted to weigh in on that comment.
No.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, we will wrap this up at 9:47 p.m. I want to thank everybody. We will be here next week for a very long night, over 20 items. Council, please try to get any questions that you might have in by Friday afternoon would be great. Certainly when they come in at 3, 4, and 5 o'clock on Mondays with this kind of agenda really can be challenging for staff. So it's going to be a lot of work. It's probably going to be a late night, some heavy stuff, but we'll get it done. Thanks for all your help tonight. Thank you.